Welcome to Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. Our team's goal is to present science-based information about gardening and all things nature in New York's Hudson Valley. Hosts Jean and Tim, along with team members
Teresa, Linda, and Annie,
are master gardener volunteers for New York's Columbia and Greene counties. So if you're interested in gardening or nature, or nuggets of information about what's happening outside your door, settle in. Enjoy the conversation. Whatever the season, we have something to say.
Hello, and welcome back to Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. I'm Jean Thomas.
And I'm Robin Smith.
We're very happy to have one of our favorite visitors back again today. Catherine Schneider, author of Birding the Hudson Valley, has agreed to chat with us about bluebirds, mostly the Eastern Bluebird. Welcome, Catherine.
Thanks, Jean. Thank you for having me back. I'm really excited to talk about bluebirds because there's just so much to tell. We know a great deal about Eastern bluebirds.
Why is that?
Well, I think it's mostly because we see them a lot. They're really pretty, and you can tell males from females, so you sort of know what's going on. And some of them live in our backyards. They're our state bird, but also Missouri state bird. And, of course, they're members of the thrush family.
Oh, please tell me more about thrushes.
Well, robins and wood thrushes are members of the thrush family. They're probably birds that are familiar to you around here. And, of course, they sing beautifully. And they eat a lot of fruit, which makes them very conspicuous to us because we have fruit in our backyards a lot of the time. Thrushes are a very successful group. They're found on every continent except Antarctica. And there are three kinds of bluebirds in North America in the thrush family. There's the western bluebird, which is mostly found in the desert southwest in California and in the northern Rockies. And then there's the mountain bluebird, which, as you might suspect, is in the Rocky Mountains. But it's a really different color. It's a cerulean blue instead of the kind of blue we have here. And then, of course, there's the eastern bluebird, which occupies most of the United States and southern Canada, east of the Rocky Mountains.
And they take my morning walk with me every day. I saw some yesterday posing for pictures. There are only a few birds that are attractive, both musically and visually. I'm especially fond of cardinals, of course, goldfinches, and the bluebirds. But we almost lost the bluebirds, didn't we?
Well, the population of bluebirds in the United States was thought to peak about 1900, and then it declined. They are cavity nesters, and they're secondary cavity nesters, which means they don't have a bill that's big enough to excavate their own holes. They have to use natural cavities that they find themselves, or sometimes old woodpecker holes. The introduction of the European starling and the house sparrow, which also use holes, made them have big competitors, and these birds are pretty aggressive. So the bluebirds were excluded from the existing cavities. Breeding bird surveys show that populations have increased since 1966, when the survey started. But thanks mostly to bluebird trails and nest box programs in the 1960s and 70s, humans helped contribute to their recovery. Especially boxes that are made so starlings can't fit in the hole help them a great deal. They're no longer imperiled and not really of conservation concern today.
So tell us about the migration habits of the bluebirds, Catherine. My experience is that at least some of them are around for the winter. I know I see them occasionally, haven't seen them yet. What's the story there?
Well, around here, many eastern bluebirds have two broods in the summer. How successful they are and how well they do depends on how long the summer is. So at higher latitudes, they generally don't have a second brood. How abundant food is. So there's a lot of variables about whether they have one or two broods, but mostly around in New York, many of them have two. The first group of young disperse from the nest, and they generally do migrate short distances away from the nest. But typically the young from the last brood stay with their parents in family flocks over the winter. So what you see are parents and young from the second brood. During the winter, they eat a lot of fruit and sometimes roost communally, so there's whole piles of bluebirds in boxes sometimes. But the eastern bluebirds at the more northern latitudes, they breed all the way into southern Canada. There they do short migrations south, so they tend to clear out of those far northern parts of their range. But I guess here the living is relatively easy compared to Canada.
Are the Canadians coming to us?
No, I guess so.
Well, Catherine, you've met us. You know, we're very focused on food in this group. What do they eat? Does their diet change seasonally?
Well, like nearly all songbirds, they feed their young animal matter, mostly caterpillars, but also insects and spiders. And their feeding behavior is very distinctive. If you've watched them in the breeding season, when they're catching insects, they perch on low perches and drop down to the ground. It's called drop foraging or sallying from low perches, and they catch most of their insect food either on the way down or on the ground itself. The adults have a very diverse diet, but the babies have to have animal matter that's caught that way. Being thrushes, they're big fruit eaters, especially in the fall and winter when fruit is more available. They eat almost no seed, so they're not going to come to your sunflower cedar. But we do see them on winterberry and sumac native plants that they like to eat. Some people get them at their feeders in winter eating suet or maybe fresh mealworms or something called zicto.
What is zicto?
Zicto is great stuff. It was invented by a woman named Julie Zickenfuss, who's an artist, writer, speaker, blogger, wildlife rehabilitator. She's a very talented woman. And she developed this recipe, which has basically everything a bird needs to be strong and healthy. She was using it for rehabilitating birds. But it's basically a mixture of lard, peanut butter, chick starter, oatmeal, cornmeal, and flour. You melt the lard and the peanut butter in the microwave, and then you put all this dry stuff in. It comes out with a crumbly sort of thing, and you put it out on a platform, and the birds all kinds of birds just really love it. You can only feed it in winter because it's way too rich in the summer, but bluebirds will come to zicto.
Good to know. Okay, we touched on the housing situation earlier when we talked about almost losing them. How can we help make our homes more hospitable as an area? What's there? Well, we talked about the competition a little bit, but...
Well, I mean, if you want to attract bluebirds to your house, good habitat is really important. If you don't have good habitat, they're really not going to be very successful. They use a territory around the hole for courtship, mating, and nesting and feeding. So they have what we used to call all-purpose territories. In placing a nest box, you want them to be able to see open areas with little understory and generally sparse ground cover. Pastures, orchards, parklands are usually good habitat, and open forest edges. So don't cut down trees with holes in them. That's habitat. But planting native plants in your yards is a really good idea because those will have the caterpillars that they need, whereas ornamentals may not. We can provide nest boxes, and these are basically artificial nest holes. But you don't want to put a nest box up if you're not going to be able to take care of it and monitor it properly. The box has to have the right size hole. That's critically important because if it's too big, you're going to get starlings and other birds. So the hole should be about 1 3/8 inches or 3.8 centimeters, according to the North American Bluebird Society. So if you're really interested in the right dimensions, you can look. There's dozens of plans for bluebird houses online, and there's lots of different designs, but the hole and the dimensions are the most important things. Another thing is that location is really important. If you put your nest boxes too close to any kind of shrubbery, they will be attractive to house wrens. And house wrens are mean to bluebirds. They puncture holes in their eggs and remove them. Wrens are protected birds, so you can't hurt them.
They're little bullies.
Oh, they really are bullies. But if you put your nest box in an area away from shrubbery with a field view about 10 meters from a high perch that they can fly from, that's a good idea. There are also tree swallows. Tree swallows use the same size hole and the same kind of box, and they will compete with bluebirds for your nest boxes. So what we recommend is to put 2 boxes in pairs between 5 and 15 yards apart. Tree swallow defends only a territory around the hole, and it feeds on aerial insectivores like mosquitoes and things like that. So it's not going to defend a territory close to the house. It's not going to defend a lot of land like a bluebird does. So you have 1 box there for the bluebirds and 1 box there for the tree swallows, and in theory, there should be enough homes for everybody. I will say that I have seen tree swallows in paired boxes, but this is your best bet to pair boxes close to each other and let a tree swallow have one and a bluebird have another. Another major competitor, and probably the most problematic, is the house sparrow. These guys are introduced to the United States, and they're very common around farms and barns, especially because they eat seed. And they are very aggressive. They will expel bluebirds from the house, and they will even kill the young, which is very unfortunate, by pecking their heads. A few of the things you can do is don't provide food for the house sparrows in the summer. Don't give them seed or shelter. If you're next to a farm, put the bluebird box absolutely as far away from the farm as you can, away from the barns particularly. You can make things called sparrow spookers, which are mylar strings that you can attach to the box. These don't seem to bother the bluebirds, and they do bother the house sparrows, but you don't want to put those up until the bluebirds have their first egg because they don't stay if you do that, if you put it up too early. I will say that the house sparrow is not protected like many of the other migratory birds, and you can remove nests and eggs, but they are very, very persistent. I think the best strategy is to watch the box carefully, remove those eggs and nests as they are, they keep rebuilding them, but keep removing them. You have to be more persistent than the house sparrow. But the most important thing is to not let them succeed, because if they do succeed in nesting in one of your boxes, they will come back year after year after year. You can do things like plug the hole, or this year I opened my nest boxes and just because I couldn't keep up with the house sparrows. But of course, you won't have any bluebirds either if you do that. But don't let them succeed under any circumstances. And those are just the birds that are problems for bluebirds. There are other kinds of predators. There are things like snakes, raccoons, chipmunks, bears. You wouldn't believe what bears do to a bluebird box, and cats, of course. For these, you need what they call a predator guard. A predator guard, usually we mount these bluebird boxes on a piece of electrical conduit pipe, and the predator guard is the best ones are what they call a stovepipe baffle. It's basically a hollow piece of metal on the pole so that when something crawls up from underneath, it can't get to the box. I guess the take-home message here is that you should have to be a good parent if you want to put up nest boxes. You have to clean them out in early March, and you have to watch them and monitor them. Otherwise, you're just simply providing homes for house sparrows, and we don't want any more house sparrows. They're already a pretty significant problem, and they will hurt bluebirds. So my mantra is first do no harm.
Then get the sparrows.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about how they court and raise their young?
Oh, it's a very nice story. The male sings a beautiful song to attract the female and defends a territory. He actually does courtship feeding, so he brings her food. They become bonded when the female finally enters the nest cavity. And after that, frankly, the female does almost all the work. She builds the nest alone. She makes it up of grass and pine needles. She lays 3 to 6 pale blue eggs generally and incubates them alone by herself for 14 days. The male's around, but he doesn't do anything. Well, he defends the territory.
He brings food.
Sometimes. When the young hatch, they're what we call altricial young. They're naked, they have no feathers, and their eyes are closed, so they're blind, unlike things like baby chicks, for example, which have down feathers from the beginning. And they're fed by both parents. I mean, the male's mostly around to help raise the young and defend the territory. So they're fed for about 3 weeks, and after they leave the nest, the parents feed the fledglings for another 10 days. And they're very vulnerable to things like cats at that time because they're hiding in the shrubbery and making noises and begging for the parents to come, and the cats aren't stupid. So they're vulnerable to cats during this time. And the success of the fledglings generally determines how long the pair bond lasts. So if they breed successfully, the male and the female will stay together. But if he's a bad father or the babies don't make it, she'll mate with someone else.
Like people.
Exactly. I think that's why we like bluebirds, because they're a lot like people.
Oh, that's funny. Okay, they are pretty smart little guys, aren't they? I feed mine live mealworms in the spring when they're raising their chicks.
I bet they love that.
They do. My family doesn't like the live worms in the fridge, but that's their problem. They learn quickly what time breakfast is, and they're out there lined out on the line wires. On mild winter days, they go for walks with me and the dog.
That's nice.
So they're pretty bright and very social.
Well, food for the young is critically important. I mean, there are lots of other things that happen to the young, but food is incredibly important. And many plants that we plant in our yards are non-native ornamental plants, and these kinds of plants don't supply the caterpillars that are needed by our songbirds. So especially to raise the young eat almost nothing else. Sometimes the babies, especially early broods, can die of exposure if we have a long period of rainy weather and cold. That's very hard for the parents to find food under those circumstances, but food is critically important for the young.
So, of course, all birds, all people, all mammals need water, right? So what do we do about that?
Well, a properly maintained bird bath is a treat for them. They love to bathe. It's important to keep your bird bath clean. but they especially like running water, a little trickle. There are ways to rig up a little water feature in your yard. Julie Zickenboos, I keep promoting her here, has developed a bird bath that she calls a warbler fall. It actually has a pump, and it creates a tiny waterfall. She markets this on her website, and you can order a warbler fall with all the pieces and directions from her, and she sells plans online. I asked my husband to get me one of these for Christmas. It's a bit of a project for us because the pump has to have electricity, but it attracts all kinds of birds all summer, and especially warblers that are only here in the summer. They love a trickle of water for bathing in.
Ooh. Do they end up in battles over the water with different
Not
types?
usually, no.
They play well?
Yeah.
Okay. We've included a link to the New York State Bluebird Society, and they've got a really good website. And Cornell Lab also, the ornithology lab. And you've got a lot of references in your book, but not on bluebirds. Can you explain to our listeners how your book is organized? You cover the whole Hudson from one end to the other, and areas further afield within the state. I know I'm going astray a little bit, but you're telling people where to go and how to find other birds as well, and I'm sure that bluebirds are hanging out there too.
Oh, definitely. There are lots of places in my book where you can see bluebirds. I wrote my book because I wanted to make people go beyond their bird feeders. I wanted them to see birds in other places and to explore the Hudson Valley's bird life. So the book is basically divided into two parts. The first part is basically how to become a bird watcher, how to get beyond the bird feeder and start to see birds in other places, where to go, at what times of the year. And the second half of the book is all about places in the 10 counties that border the Hudson River between Albany and New York City. I just went to all the best birding sites and picked out 10 from each county, and I want to send people there to explore birding.
So we could go on for hours talking with you, Catherine, but the clock must be obeyed. So let's close with our little philosophical final question. Catherine, what gives you hope for the future?
Well, I think people are basically educable and interested in birds, so education gives me hope. People love birds, and especially bluebirds. They're starting to understand the importance of native plants for bird food, and they're learning that boxes need to be tended and need to be properly designed. They started to learn that feral cats are serious problems for birds, and I think if we can just educate people about birds, they will care about them and want to take care of them. So education is why I do things like this podcast and lots of other talks, because I want people to learn what birds need.
And we love to have you because we always learn something when you come visit. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
Sure.
That concludes another episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. We would like to thank
Sandra Powers,
and Devin Connolly from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties for production support. And a special thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. You can find links to any of the topics mentioned in this episode at our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org. Comments and suggestions for future topics may be directed to us at columbiagreenmgb@cornell.edu or on the CCE Master Gardener Volunteers of Columbia and Greene Counties Facebook page. For more information about Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties, visit our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org or visit us in Hudson or in Acre. Cornell Cooperative Extension provides equal programming and employment opportunities